Can positivity really be toxic? That's what we're talking about this week on the 1D1 podcast. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Really happy that you're watching, listening, whatever it is. We're on episode 7 now, so we're a little ways into the podcast experience now. Still got a long way to go, but I've been really happy with how it's gone so far. So today we're going to talk about toxic positivity, which is kind of a newer idea that I was told about fairly recently, and I've kind of looked into a little bit and thought about, and it's very interesting. And the reason why it's really interesting, because so much of our motivational thinking that we do on social media or with our friends or even to ourselves is really just positive thinking. But when I talk about positive thinking, I mean really optimistic thinking. Positivity is really implementing optimism, which is tending to focus on the potential good things rather than the potential bad things. And so positivity is when we apply that optimistic way of thinking. Yet there's this concept of toxic positivity where we don't just emphasize the good more than we emphasize the bad, but we completely cut out the bad and all we think about is the good. And it's something that we can slide into very easily. And so I want to talk about today how that can happen and how we can avoid it and how we can be vulnerable and transparent and prevent toxic positivity from coming into play and be authentic but also optimistic, and how we can balance those two things together. So like I said earlier, positivity from a pure definition standpoint is really concerned with optimism, which is basically just hoping for the best and acting in such a way as, that acting in such a way that could potentially bring about the best, right? And being hopeful in that way. And a good analogy for this is, all other things remaining equal, because there's a lot of factors in this illustration, but that you're at the airport and you're walking through the terminal and you're reasonably hoping that your flight is on time and you're going to act in that direction. So it'd be like walking in and checking your bags and going, okay, we should be on time, should be good. So we don't have to run through the airport. We don't have to freak out. We can take a second and get some food. That's optimism in this analogy, is hoping for the best and acting as if the best could really be a possibility. But when toxic positivity comes in is when we're hoping that the flight will be on time and we're acting like it's going to be on time, but then we literally watch the plane fly away without us. Toxic positivity then really, by this analogy, really comes into play when the bad things happen. And when we want to be optimistic and be positive, but there are negative emotions and negative things that we have to deal with. So the question then is, how do we deal with them in a positive way? Because toxic positivity is what happens when we deal with those feelings in a negative way. Toxic positivity is really saying, okay, instead of dealing with this really negative thing here and working through these negative feelings, I'm just going to push that aside and just be positive. And that might work for a little bit. But eventually, all that negative stuff that we push aside is going to pile up and topple over onto us. And we're going to have a really tough moment of dealing and reckoning with all those negative emotions that we couldn't process. And that's the danger of toxic positivity. At least the danger to ourselves. Because there's really two distinct dangers to toxic positivity, in my opinion. They're not the only two dangers, but they're two major dangers that I have come to think about as I've worked through this a little bit. So the first major danger is a really personal, practical one. Mainly that if we just minimize the bad things and only focus on the good, then we can never deal with and process through and really find ways to cope with the negative things because we just refuse to touch them, right? And so we can't allow ourselves to just have all these skeletons in the closet. Like, we have to at some point deal with these negative things. And it's hard because it's not fun to deal with negative things, and it doesn't feel good. And a lot of times it's more than just doesn't feel good, like it's immensely painful. But the way that we combat toxic positivity personally is that we say, yeah, I'm going to be optimistic, but right now being optimistic and maintaining a positive attitude means that I have to take a second and engage with these negative feelings. I'm going to have to step back from just being yay, and deal with some of the things that kind of suck. And to me, you're still being positive when you take a second away from just being super happy-go-lucky and dealing with the hard things. Because that's always going to have to happen at some point. And that's the really individual basis, right? Is on an individual level, dealing with, like, coming face to face with the things that aren't so fun to talk about. Right. But there's another problem that goes on a more interpersonal level. And that is when we're being toxically positive to important people in our lives, to our loved ones, and so forth, and our friends, and our coworkers, and all those kinds of things. Right? When, for example, at work, if a teammate comes up to you and is like, hey, everything is going wrong, and I need you to help me. Toxic positivity is going, oh, it'll be okay. We'll figure it out. Don't worry about it. Right? And because a lot of times we're tempted to do that because our model of positivity is just that think good all the time and don't really engage with the negative stuff. Not that, I don't think that that's what we all think, but I think that that's what we fall into sometimes. And I don't think that being positive is bad. I just think that we have to watch ourselves and make sure that we don't fall for this lesser form of it where it's just think everything's good all the time and not deal with the bad stuff. Real positivity in that situation would be, the teammate saying, hey, everything's going wrong, and saying, okay, I think we can fix it, but how can I help? Like, tell me what's going wrong. And I think that can apply in less formal relationships too, when someone is struggling, and not just, as a lot of times, honestly, I'm tempted to do, just say, oh, it'll be fine, don't worry about it, we'll get through it. But actually being able to step back from everything's going to be great and say, yeah, we'll get through this eventually, but right now we need to sit in this moment and sort through these feelings. And that's true positivity, true optimism, is seeing the best down the road, but understanding that sometimes we just need to sit in this moment right here and get things right before we can move forward. I think a major reason why it can be difficult to do this real positivity is because it's humbling, right? Because we finally go, oh, I can't control everything. It's like, oh, I am imperfect. This world is imperfect. That there are a lot of things that are wrong that I can't control. And it's very humbling because we see ourselves truly, which is that we think that we are the captains of our own fate. We think that we have mastered the universe and we have no need for any other hypothesis other than us. But when we find out, oh, actually, there are a lot of things that we are fundamentally unable to control or confront. And that's a really humbling thing when, so much of the mindsets that we've come into is that, just self-actualization, speak it into existence, all this stuff. But then we eventually find out, in my opinion, after we've done all the affirmations and speaking it into existences, and we've done all that stuff, eventually the conclusion we come to is that we really are not very powerful, or at least not as powerful as we thought. That we're fundamentally really in need. And we're fundamentally really falling short in a lot of ways. And that's not a super fun, uplifting thing that you want to post on your Instagram story. But it's the truth, is that we all come to the end of ourselves eventually. And we have to make this decision of, are we going to push that reality off, or are we going to move forward? As we talk about this area of shortfalls and pushing things off and all that stuff, necessitates honesty from me and how I deal with that. Because for me, when I deal with shortfalls and shortcomings, it's not as strategic as I would like it to be, where I can just write down, here are all the things I'm bad at, and now I can fix it and it'll be fine. It's not quite that simple, unfortunately. I wish it was, but unfortunately, dealing with problems is very complicated. So all this discussion about not minimizing shortfalls and being honest and confronting problems as a way of preventing toxic positivity is really good, and I think it could be really helpful, but it also necessitates some honesty from me of how I deal with my shortfalls. And I wish that it was kind of the implied way that we deal with it. If we're kind of having this positivity and what we emphasize conversation, the implied way of doing it is, well, take a minute, take like maybe once a month and figure out everything that's wrong with you and then fix it and it'll be fine. You know, and it's healthy to regularly reflect. That's part of the project I'm working on, is regularly reflecting. But, you know, in all honesty, from my personal experience, it's not quite that simple, because we're people and we're biased and we don't understand ourselves perfectly. And, you know, so for me, the thing that I turn to, let's say, when I have shortfalls is not, okay, well, I'm good enough to figure out everything that's wrong with me and make everything right. You know, for me, is understanding that Jesus was perfect for me, and so I don't have to be perfect. I just need to acknowledge my faults and put them toward Him and let Him take care of it. Because if we're being honest, none of us can handle that burden of all the problems and issues that we have to resolve in the world. None of us can bear that ourselves. And I think you have to be really honest with yourself to come to that point. But that's the honest perspective. That's what I use. Because for me, it's simply not enough to really be honest about every single thing that we have to confront and pretend like I can figure it all out, because I can't a lot of the time. Well, any of the time. So that's the gist of where toxic positivity can lead us and where real positivity can lead us. And so what's a practical takeaway for this week? Well, I think a really practical takeaway right now is to, when you see a situation come up that's hard, with yourself or with someone else, instead of just saying, oh yeah, it'll be fine, try, how can I help? Or do you want to talk about it? Something like that creates a bridge of that, yeah, that really sucked, but we're just going to sit in this moment right now. Instead of trying to fix everything or figure it all out, like I'm so tempted to do a lot of the time, and I do a lot. And so I think that's a really solid way to try it. And then on a more personal way, I would say if you're feeling maybe negative about something and trying to be positive, but not in like a fake way, and, you know, be authentically positive, not toxically positive, I would say have a conversation with yourself. If there's something that's discouraging or that was hard, don't just push it aside, say, whatever, it'll be fine. Sit and say, okay, no, like, what is really my concern with this? And work it through, because that's really going to benefit you in the long term, practically and from a mental health kind of standpoint too. Like, at some point, we're always going to have to deal with that stuff. So I just encourage you to come face to face with those tough things, because eventually dealing with that will pay off down the road. So those are my thoughts on toxic positivity. It's not an exhaustive look at it, but those are kind of my initial thoughts as I've sat on it. So thank you so much for watching. Comment, DM, whatever. If you have any thoughts, questions, counterpoints, outbursts, let me know. If you have any thoughts, and I'd love to add it to an upcoming video. So thanks for watching or listening, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.